Everyone, I'm going to call the meeting to order. This is the April 1st, 2025 meeting of the Baltimore Vacant Reinvestment Council. Thank you to everyone in attendance in person and online. Want to do a couple of things. First, I want to start off by noting there will be a closed session during this meeting. Closed session, I'll explain why we're entering it. But generally speaking, this is going to be a closed session to talk about property acquisition strategy, which necessitates the closing of the meeting. So I'm giving everyone that notice just so that you're prepared, because we'll have to clear the room at that time. And then we will reconvene in open session afterward. So we'll ask everyone to exit the room and then can come back in for the members. And so can you jump to the next slide? All right. Okay, just a reminder, this meeting is being recorded. There is obviously a web link. People are watching, people are viewing. We've got, I think 29 or 39 on viewing right now. Just a reminder to those who are non-members, don't, raise your hand or whatever. This is not a public participation session. So this is a session, this is a council meeting for council members, and the council members only may speak. So I apologize that this is not the open public portion of our work, but you're welcome to observe the open portions of the meeting, but not participate. So just trying to make sure everybody knows what's possible and what's not in anticipation of that happening. So first item of business, I believe, is the adoption of the meeting minutes from the March meeting. So I will seek a motion to approve the meeting March meeting minutes. So moved. Thank you, Councilman. Is there a second?
Second.
Second. Thank you, Leslie. All those in favor, please signify your support by saying aye.
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Thank you very much. Okay. So we've got an item that I've added to the agenda for today. And this is a bit of an update about the Baltimore Vacant Reinvestment Initiative, BVRI, which is the redesigned project core. And I think there's, this is timely for a number of reasons. Number one, we're 6 months in. So the council has existed for 6 months. Redesigned Baltimore Vacant or Reinvest Baltimore program, and BVRI is 6 months old. I look at this as an opportunity for us to look in the mirror and to say, where are we? What's happening? What's changing? What processes are working? What processes are not working? And so for me, again, it's an opportunity to reflect. So I've got a couple of things that I want to highlight and talk about here. Over the last few weeks, since our March meeting, I've been thinking about this in two ways. Number one, what's the near-term work that we need to do to expand the volume and speed of abatement of VBNs. The primary vehicle of that, I anticipate over the long term, will be in the in-rem process. Got a lot of work to do there. That's where the majority of our attention thus far has been focused. That's a city process that involves the judiciary, that involves obviously the community as well. But we've got a lot of work to do on that front. But in the immediate term, again, when I look in the mirror and ask myself, what are we doing to accelerate this work? I look at the question of where's the low-hanging fruit that is not ready or not movable through in-rem, either due to capacity constraints that we'll be addressing, one of the work groups is going to be working on, that the city has already identified things that they're doing. There's hopefully some good news in the budget with respect to that as well, the state budget with respect to that as well. But how do we move properties now? What I don't want is us to be looking at ourselves 6 months from now and say, well, we're about on course, the same course we were on 6 months ago. It's unacceptable, can't happen. And we'd find ourselves, I think, another 6 months after that, 6 months after that, asking, why in the world are we accepting the status quo and things haven't moved expeditiously. If you can jump to the next slide. And so I asked myself, what I ask myself, not asked, but I ask myself constantly, what can we control? What can we influence? And I think everybody's got to ask themselves that question. So for the state, it's a pool of resources, right? It's a pool of resources. That is the primary vehicle that we have influence over. And so the BVRI funds, $50 million. I think we can do a better job deploying those to elicit the type of activity that we want to see. That is consistent with the planning that the city has done with the community that Build and GBC have contributed to in meaningful ways. And ultimately to, again, increase the rate of abatement of VBNs. Jump to the next slide for me. And so for me, that means saying our process as it stands is unacceptably slow. And I'm going to tell you really quickly what that looks like today. What that looks like today is when we asked for applications from our eligible entities to receive funds, they apply in second week of April through mid-June. We close the process and begin an interagency review process, a very defensible, very thorough process that takes until about mid-November. And in early December, late November, we make an announcement of those awards. And we begin the process of entering into grant agreements. We reimburse based on eligible expenditures. And it's risk averse. It is defensible. It is thorough. What it isn't is fast. And I'm of the opinion that we've got to change how we do business. And again, we've all got to be asking ourselves, what are we doing to change how we do business to achieve the objective, which is to address the vacancy crisis in Baltimore City? And so our process, current process is long. Once you submit and we approve a reimbursement, it takes 45 days. That's generous, Commissioner. It takes at least 45 days because it goes through us. It goes to our Division of Finance and Accounting. It goes to the treasurer, and then it goes to the comptroller, and then a check gets cut or a direct deposit is made. It's 15 to 30 days in each of those entities. So we're still talking about a very slow process that doesn't prioritize efficiency, and it doesn't have a sense of urgency. So what we're planning to do this year is to, in the coming days, tomorrow officially, announce an expedited process of awarding those funds through an expedited BVRI funding round. And so rather than that slow process, we will make the dollars available to community development organizations to apply to DHCD beginning next week, as they normally would, standard timeline, closing in late May, beginning a review process that will end in June with an award through a partner, but ultimately awards to each of the eligible community development organizations operating within the Reinvest Baltimore geography for acquisition, demolition, stabilization, and ultimately rehabilitation of buildings in those areas. And to begin deploying the dollars July 1. The intent here is to enable negotiated acquisition. Let's acknowledge that there's a trade-off. There's a trade-off there, right? And the primary trade-off is we might spend more on a property through negotiated acquisition than we would through in rem acquisition or eminent domain, right? But the benefit is speed. The benefit is acknowledging that we're in a crisis. What do you do when you're in a crisis? You get out of it. We have to have a sense of urgency. It also enables us to take a critical look at performance and to reward performance. Conversations with some of our partners have illuminated a timeline that I think will work for us to award prior to July 1, allow for a brief period, 60, 90 days, something like that, of an initial period of performance, and then on a 30-day basis thereafter, so every month, to evaluate and say, how are you doing? And to reward those that are able to meet and exceed their objectives, meaning acquire, demolish, stabilize, et cetera, more on their list than they said they intended to, or to meet their goals, or outperform the other CDOs, and to reward them on that basis by entrusting them with additional resources. So in other words, our grant agreement or our agreements with community development organizations, with our community partners, isn't going to be a dollar amount. It's going to be a project list by property, by activity. Here's what we intend to acquire. Here's what we intend to demolish. Here's what we intend to stabilize. Here's what we intend to rehire. The city has helped us to create sort of a list of a sub-universe of properties. Eligible properties would, and I'm sorry if I'm getting off track, you can just adjust slides for me. There we go, perfect. Eligible properties would include three types of property. Number one, properties already owned by those community development partners. The lowest hanging fruit. Southeast CDC owns a property, you got it in hand. You can begin an activity on it, execute. You didn't have that money before? Well, we'll get it to you now. Rebuild Metro, same story. Druid Heights CDC, same story, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The second batch of properties would be properties owned by developer partners within that geography, that the CDO essentially says, we believe we can partner with them. Now, I don't think there needs to be a limit on what those who those developers are. The CDO, the community, has to say, we trust them and can work with them. We believe we can engage with them. So let's include their properties. The third is a list provided by the city of properties that have recently changed hands that still have a VBN. So essentially meaning that it is a property that is identifiable, whose owner is probably reachable. And the thinking is that that's the next lowest hanging fruit that is reachable within the Reinvest Baltimore geography. And so those three types of properties would be fundable, would be submitted in the application process. We'll provide the list of that third category to the applicants so that they may apply and can draw from that list. It's both mappable and can be provided in list form. And then by May 23rd, the end of the application timeline, you would apply, the CDOs would apply, and we would begin the review process in late May and early June. We are working on an agreement with a partner. You can see their name listed here. I'm not going to say it many times because we're still working on developing that relationship. It's a state-created entity to disperse those funds. I'll say it, here, but we still have to go through a formal process of entering into an agreement with them to validate that we can do this. But I am the vice chair of the board of directors of that entity, the Maryland Community Investment Corporation. I have great confidence we will work out that agreement, but we're working rapidly to enable the partnership because they don't face the same limits as far as process to deploy the dollars. It takes us generously 45 days, more like 90 days to deploy a check. Once an expense is approved, we want that money to arrive up front to our CDOs so that they can enter into negotiation or enter into contract with a contractor for demolition purposes or stabilization purposes without having to say, we'll hopefully get that money. We'll have it up front, can move quickly. Next slide, please. So the primary intent here is to say there's immediate term action we can take. There is still longer term, we can call it near term action that we have to take. We still have significant work to do to focus on, and the working groups are going to focus on expanding that in-rem pipeline, widening the aperture so more properties can flow through what will ultimately be the right place for the primary activity of property acquisition and disposition. With this announcement tomorrow and what I'm sharing with you today, and I welcome discussion and questions, of course, is acknowledging there's low-hanging fruit. We've got to act on it. We cannot accept processes as they stand. We cannot accept the status quo, and we've got to move. What I hope that you will take from this announcement and our changing our processes is I think everybody has to have that mindset. Everybody has to have that approach, and it's going to be unique to each entity that plays a role. But this is our way. Forgive me, Carrie. Yeah, I didn't remember if there was one more. So obviously, this is all part of a long-term process. I'm also focused on. I think we need to have continuing conversations about vacant land. We need to have continuing conversations about ease of production on that land. I have spent a little bit of time in the last month with some folks that have done great work at a state level and municipal and county level elsewhere in the country on pre-approved plans, on assembling lots, on rapid re-subdivision, which I think is something that we ought to look at or can look at together on ways to expedite that, whether that's through state legislative shifts or whether it's through process work. But pre-approved plans, modular construction, and rapid re-subdivision are some things that I want us to focus on in the future. But today, I share this with you again to tell you I have a sense of urgency that's boiling in me. I think it exists in many of you, and I want to open for discussion and questions and feedback. We're building this plane as we fly, so modifications too.
I would say it.
Sure. So first, Secretary Day, I just want to thank you for your leadership and for thinking outside of the box and your creativity, you and Commissioner Kennedy. I think this is a really interesting opportunity and interesting approach. Would love to hear the feedback from the rest of the group about this effort. The one question that I had was around the negotiated acquisition. I believe, Commissioner, correct me if I'm wrong, we are looking at those property owners or those properties where the property has changed hand within 1 year.
We went back and looked at starting at 2 years,
Okay.
which there were about 3,700 properties that transferred in the last 2 years. Okay. And of those, about 2,500 do not have permits. So there's actually a world of about 1,200 that have active permits on them.
Okay. And so for the negotiated acquisitions, would we be working with community partners to do the negotiated acquisition, or would it would be community partners that
Correct.
would?
So
So they would have to track down the owners of those properties.
in partnership with the city, I would hope
Okay,
to.
that's what.
Yeah.
I was asking.
But the work,
Mhm.
the work would be the work of the community partners. Identification of who owns it on paper. Obviously the city and state can help with that. STAT can help with that. But yeah, the intent here is to diversify the cohort of people and entities empowered with resources to go engage in that negotiated acquisition. So the intent is not to feed that into city process and force you all to take on additional work. It is rather to say, let's empower, let's create an army. And that army, I think, is ready, but not resourced.
Exactly.
And I will say, there are varying degrees of capacity in that world, and some of them are going to be able to run out of the gate, and some of them are going to be wanting out of the gate. And so some are going to produce more early on, and some are not. And I think with our resources, we got to be focused on the objective. The objective is abate VBMs. The objective is get them rehabbed and fill them with people and families. That's the objective. The objective isn't the end state isn't empowering organizations. That being said, I think we have an opportunity to empower organizations. And those with limited capacity. We've talked to entities that are in this space that are willing to put dollars into capacity building of community development organizations. I'm sure we've all talked to those folks out there in the world that are willing to do that. But I would say that's a piece of the work here, is to help empower them to do better and to be able to do more. Those that are constrained, but those that are capable of moving fast, let's help them move fast. That's the.
So 2 quick follow-ups here, and then I'll turn it over to you. So one follow-up is, I wonder if we should be thinking about additional resources. I'm thinking real estate attorneys. So I'm not sure how many of our partners have done a lot of the negotiated acquisition, maybe some, but we should be thinking about if they need those legal resources in order to help do that work. The other question is, if we know the universe of 2,500 or so that we believe are reachable, should we have a portion that is dedicated to our partners, but then should we as the city and state also be working on negotiated acquisition? Because one of the challenges is the amount of properties that we own that we could actually take through some sort of process. And so should we also be thinking about our own negotiated acquisition?
Absolutely. And that is part of what we've done, in block level planning, which we'll talk about more. We always start with negotiated acquisition. And if that doesn't work, then we move it to condemnation, eminent domain. I think that we also need to be looking at that world of 2,500 properties to see of those which properties are on the TIF list. And so the team is doing additional data analysis to help us really get at numbers that, and geographic areas based on knowing where the community development partners work. A lot of them have geographic boundaries. So we want to make sure that we're looking at by geography, by what is on the TIF list, what, if any of those are in REM eligible right now or not, and then really kind of helping to support that targeted list for partners, and then what might make sense for the city.
Yep. And then my last question here. So also, and you and I have talked a little bit about this, Secretary Day, about this idea of a campaign, because I think once the market hears that the city, the state, whomever is paying cash for your vacant home, then there may be folks that come to us. And I'm not sure right now, maybe we're equipped for people to call us to offer up their properties to us, but we might want to be proactive about that.
Yeah, I think communication is going to be key around this. Obviously, the conversation that we're going to have today around block level planning and properties and looking at a property list and block list, all of that, can inspire. It can inspire speculation, but it can also inspire investment. I think messaging that in such a way that attracts investment will work to the city's advantage ultimately, work to Baltimore's advantage. I don't mean city government. Baltimore. Secretary?
Yeah, first of all, totally agree with the tiered approach in terms of just we've got to get moving. We can't get caught up in the processes and nothing's going on. So kudos to the team on that. I think having been in the trenches running CDCs, I think my biggest cautionary note is the capacity. And I think building on what Faith was saying, having like a pool of resources and talent as it relates to those legal, financial, other systems, because you also want to grow the capacity. One of the things we did when I was running a CDC and doing real estate development in the past is we actually contracted with a retired real estate developer who essentially became an extension of our staff when we were trying to grow our internal capacity around real estate development and that. And there's a lot of different ways, and I'm sure you've all have seen it. And then I think the issue about is the scaling, because my hope is this will be so successful, there will be more than we can handle. And then the other side of that is there'll be more than anybody can handle, and it kind of collapses underneath in terms of just really thinking through that scaling of what is manageable, because you want everyone to succeed. And then what is that portfolio approach? If there's a portfolio approach to the properties, maybe some of this could be processed as a portfolio or a scale to sort of help move that through the system. So those are just some thoughts of how to ensure success. Because I think this is the only way we're gonna be able to really sit here 6 months from now and feel like, okay, we're on this, things are moving.
And let me just say, I'm of the opinion that this so-called low-hanging fruit, those three categories of properties, there won't be the same opportunity a year or two from now as this set of properties is those currently owned by CDOs, currently owned by developers in particular, are actioned.
Yeah.
Whatever the action, whatever the plan is, whether it's again demolition or rehab, and then those other that are entering into the pipeline through this path and not through an in-rem acquisition by the city, it will shift a grouping of properties into CDO ownership and subsequent action. Again, simultaneously, we need to be working to expand the in-rem pipeline. And so as one decreases, the other should be rapidly increasing. That's I think where we have set ourselves up in the last few months to focus our collective discussions is about that expansion of in-rem capacity. What are the challenges, et cetera? What are the obstacles? What I think we're talking about now is to say the results of that are not going to be achieved quick enough, just not. And so we've got to simultaneously do something today. Mark, did you have something?
So a couple important things I want to say, right? So July is a planned timeline. I mean, you have a huge injection of state resources now into redevelopment. And so there are a couple then capacity issues I want us to talk. One on the private side, that then will spike people pursuing other construction loans and bank financing, and we can work with our partners to at least be in a place to where people call that there's some alignment. And so we'll take that on. But I'm curious from coordination with the city, like there are some things that need to be in place. That's what Faith mentioned. If people call and say, hey, I want to sell my property, do we have all of those things at least in the queue to be lined up so that we don't deploy state support and then that could be impacted?
All those systems.
Yeah, on the what happens when we get a call question. So if there's a given, and I want to get back to your first point too in a minute, so remind me if I forget. But if there's a given set of properties, I think it's great if opportunity arises and somebody raises a flag and says, I've got a VBN on my property. Will somebody take it? I want to sell it. Bless you. I think that's not a loss, right? So opportunity may occur or may direct attention somewhere. And I do think it would be helpful if that call didn't go directly to the community development entity or Bernie entity or whatever who's operating in that area. It'd be great if it came to the city that they could be directed. Okay. And that we are flexible enough that we could say, take the opportunity. It's a win, right? It's a VBN. Maybe you know that it was possible. Maybe you didn't know that they were reachable, but they obviously are. They're willing to sell it. It's in your target area. It's on a block. It's a priority. Go for it. So what we enter into with the awardees is not going to be binding in the sense that there's a set number of dollars awarded to each entity, but rather a strategy almost. Now, I was envisioning that as a by property strategy, but perhaps we need some flexibility built in. And I will say, Carrie and David and Carol, the state team have been saying, flexibility is important. Sometimes I listen. I just need it said to me like five times, But I think you're onto something. And I think that's something we can work into this so that when that call comes, we can direct people and say, hey, it's in Park Heights Renaissance area. Let's connect you to Park Heights. They can acquire it, through using the state funds through this strategy. So I think that's a great point and something we can incorporate. I don't want to lose track of your first point, which is huge, which is what we're talking about here is essentially addressing the gap, right? I mean, we're talking about subsidy addressing acquisition costs that are never going to come back, demolition costs that are never going to come back, stabilization costs that are never going to come back. But there's an opportunity there's a huge need. The greater portion, the greater cost is the rehabilitation cost. It's the primary construction cost. And so there's an opportunity to address that. I don't know that the state has the capacity to I know we don't have the capacity to single-handedly address it, but I think you're on to something huge that needs further discussion and planning.
And I would follow up on that to say that we've recognized at the city, and the secretary and I have talked about this, we've talked about it with a number of people around the table, that one of the most important needs that we have right now, like when we talk about accelerating this work, is a line of credit program that is a little bit more flexible. We have a number of different eyes that are out there that have a little bit of a line of credit, but we know that those programs for some of our CDFI lenders, that line of credit program is still a barrier, or the requirements associated that they put in are still too onerous, and it's not moving as fast enough. There's limits on the number of properties at one time. There's limits on how much they can draw at certain times. But in the work that we've done over especially the last 2 years, in terms of interviewing with our development partners, whether or not they're our private development partners, our nonprofit development partners, our CDOs, our nonprofit, non-CDO partners, you name it, it is all about that line of credit. And it doesn't have to be just at one CDFI, but it's working with all of the CDFIs that we have in the city to say, what is the capacity and how can we assist in getting to a broader line of credit that can meet people where they are. We have some of our development partners, they need a $250,000 construction line of credit, and they might need like a $30,000 operating line of credit. Then we have others in terms of a larger capacity that could go up to a $2 million line of credit, might also need some operating line of credit, might not need operating credit. But that $2 million line of credit completely changes the game in terms of the speed in which they can do the renovations. Right now, also in terms of getting at that, is driving down the interest rate on those lines of credit. We have developers that are out spending anywhere from 8% is nice, but I would say more like a 9 to 16% interest on their construction loans. And they're having to pay that, which is increasing that interest, increases the total development cost, which increases the appraisal gap, which increases how much of the public dollars are needing to go in to close that appraisal gap to then get the outcomes we want. So if we can collectively work together to work with the CDFIs, and it can be managing the ones that they have, pulling together another lending pool to create something that has a easier interest rate that can move faster, because that's the other thing. They're having to close on every single property, right? They're having to close on each construction line. There's underwriting fees, everything involved in that. And that is a key piece of not just identifying the properties, not just helping with the CDO capacity building, but really on that lending side isn't just about construction loans. It is a line of credit to help them move faster. And I think that's a great place for the BVRC and the did we call it the finance? Now I forget the name of the formal committee, if it ended up finance and philanthropy or wherever that falls. And that committee also, I know, has had a focus on building capacity with our CDOs and what is needed there from an operations standpoint. But all of that works together to move it. But if there was one thing that we could get into place, and I know that CDFIs are ready, they're eager to be convened in a manner to work through that, and they're eager to get an influx of funds, and not just our local ones, like National Community Stabilization Trust, NCST is at the table. They're ready to pull a trigger if we can help get the pool together to kind of seed those.
I think my recommendation would be, I said, if we're targeting July, have some clear paths forward on financing that's available to the partners, so we can actually provide the capital as needed to move forward.
So I know so I would ask the finance working group and GBC to lead that effort. I mean, I know you're already thinking about this, so your leadership's critical here on that. The other thing that
Sorry,
yeah,
but
please.
MCIC is gonna be the kind of overarching capacity, and then they would be like a pass-through, I guess.
Well, so I think the way to envision is the 50 million would flow through MCIC.
Right. So they could also be building capacity in the CDFIs too,
Yeah, one can argue that. I think that would take, sure.
right? Isn't that part of their?
This is it.
So
Lending pool.
I think we've got to look
We get
at
that.
what their what their limitations are from a statutory standpoint. But within, if it's allowable, I think it's an entity that we want to engage other financial institutions and partners. That's where they're going to shine. I think MCIC is engaging other financial partners and being a convener and deployer of resources.
Kind of the wholesaler.
Yeah.
And then you've got the retailers that are,
They could also be a standard bearer, which would then help at least design what needs to happen at the CDFI level. And I think that that's gonna be the key thing that we're gonna need MCIC to deliver on. It's not just about getting the cash out, it's also about making sure that it's
what are those systems, templates,
and
processes, and
how,
having
and what
them
the
be
expectation is
consistent.
on moving it into
Yeah, and one of the things that that we will need to ask is, are there opportunities for philanthropy to engage to support, to support MCIC, building its own capacity internally, staff capacity. I mean, that's something that, it's small and it needs to grow. And so I think, one of the questions that we're going to have is there an opportunity, at least in the early years or early year, to get some outside support to grow that capacity? I think we've talked about a model where they could have a business model where they are able to recoup some of the dollars that pass through them, administrative fee or something like that. But on the front end, we want to get those dollars out to the street. And I think that conversation is going to be necessary at some point about, if there's willingness to support capacity building within MCIC,
Yeah.
so that it can do some of the things that you're talking
And I think you definitely have some CDFIs who are really, I think, underutilized too, to sort of contrapoint. But yeah, so we should also take a look at the capacity at that level as well.
And then I would add one other item in terms of the sense of urgency and moving forward from the city side. Mayor Scott, CEO Leach, Deputy Mayor Williams, they recently announced Be More Fast, which is specifically looking at not just what people say permitting, but actually the entire development process, which includes in Be More Fast things like pre-designed plans that are 90% permit ready or 80% permit ready, different components around subdivision, different components around kind of internal processes between the agencies on what supports the overall development process to moving that forward. That's been a key driving factor for the administration and for the mayor, recognizing that this work and the strategies that we've laid out in terms of a $3 billion financial capital plan cannot be met without the operations, the shift of the processes, and being more fast.
So, and I was thinking, I applaud you, Secretary Day, and the state for moving forward with a sense of urgency to make that change, to actually show that you're doing a sense of urgency. And it behooves all of us to continue to work at a sense of urgency on how we can do things differently. And when that money hits our community, that we're looking at, as we acquire properties, the targeted approach where we're using whole blocks so that we can have community involved in that and implementing their neighborhood plan and also turn the market. So we have to realize that as these entities grow, because, you know, when the money hits the ground, people are going to come from many places. So we just have to ensure that we're thinking about our community, the people in the community, that they're at the table, helping to make those decisions, but that we also target the acquisition. When we get those properties, it needs to be transparent to us because we want a plan. We already have plans in certain neighborhoods where they want to move block by block, and they've already made those decisions. So I applaud you for pushing us.
Thank you. And in some of those neighborhoods, some of those organizations own some properties. There are, you know, and I know that it's tough to carry properties, and that's again why we want to get resources out
Right.
as
Some
quickly
of
as
them-
possible.
Right, they own them and then they've had difficulty getting other properties to make a whole block. And that's been the struggle. So the transparency of knowing which ones we've acquired so that we can move quickly is what I'm saying.
Well, and, you know, and my hope is that this would enable more rapid execution on those visions. Not, you know, not be an alternative to the visions of community, but rather be, you know, a resource to execute.
Right, sounds like it can. And like I said, the properties where communities have already acquired some properties, but having difficulty acquiring other ones because you can't find the person who owns it, you can't do this. It's in this long process. It just holds up beginning to do the whole block approach and turning that block around and moving to the next one.
Thanks. I was just gonna say, I mean, I think the Gold Sector Foundation would be very interested in supporting capacity building at MCIC if it was gonna tangibly like increase the throughput. So if there's an actionable proposal in that regard, we would be interested in advancing that.
Thank you. We will ensure that you receive an actionable proposal.
You need
You have it
plans.
right there, ready?
You need plans, you need process, but we need progress.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's,
Outcomes.
yeah, it's gotta be specific to actually pushing more through.
Yeah, and we've talked about exactly what that capacity is. And we've talked about a lot of different activities, and some additional ones have been brought up today, whether it's, you know, real estate expertise, legal expertise, but even just people who can process payments. I mean, truly, I mean, everything about the processing, they can do faster if they have the capacity to do so, because they're not bound by the same slow process that state government is bound by. So it gives us an advantage there.
So the question, so the MCIC option you said is still something in progress.
Yeah,
has not been
I'm
finalized.
certainly getting ahead of myself, but I'm
Okay.
doing it on purpose, because we don't have time to waste.
Right, but I hear you, but it's something
So
in
look,
progress.
I've introduced it to the board. It's
There's
been
another
well,
board member here.
yeah, there's another board member here. It was well received, I think, would you agree it was well received?
Yes.
But we do have to actually enter into, we have a draft MOU, we have to enter into.
To an agreement.
We're rapidly working on MOU, the draft MOUs with our CDO partners, the draft award to MCIC, like all of these things are being built in the last
And I
weeks and
think we can
days.
be helpful in encouraging the broader board to take this on, because they currently have authorization to do new market tax credits, right? My understanding Maryland has missed out in the past on maximizing that tool.
Yeah.
And so it already is embedded with tools that move development forward. Where I do think, at least the next week becomes important, is it's the first real bite at an opportunity that the community groups have. It's gonna create a lot of questions about what other private capital, philanthropy, execution capacity. And so I encourage everyone to really think through what the questions are gonna receive, so that we're in a good place to answer.
Right,
Yeah, I-
stuff that we have to think through.
Yeah.
Right?
Can I just say real quick? Yeah, because I mean, look, this is happening fast. And you know, it'd be nice if we had months more to plan, but we don't. For many reasons we don't, not least of which is the money starts getting stale, right? I mean, why would we wait when we have it in our hand? And that we're in the practice of waiting. We're in the practice of sitting on our resources and not deploying them quickly. And so let's change that.
And is the goal for the target neighborhoods to be announced as far as how people respond, or is that a decision that will be made if people are granted?
So the goal is, right? The goal is, at least this is my vision, and I'm willing to be wrong, to all eligible BBNs of those three types, the three types mentioned within the Reinvest Baltimore geography, which overlay on that community development organization operating areas. And I would say we can call them Bernie organizations. The reason why there's value in using that term, because they're pre-validated essentially as entities that are in good standing with the state. They've received state revitalization program monies before. They've filled out our applications before. They cover 100% of the territory. We've got full coverage of the CDOs, and so they're there and ready to go.
Okay.
And so I would say we could further restrict, right? We could focus. We could say only some subset will be selected. My concern with that right now is if we're trying to be opportunistic and have a sense of urgency, then we've got to elevate that objective over the objective of being more constrained. Now, there will still be other activities, right? I mean, the city is receiving funds, has FY25 monies and some pre-awarded FY26 monies. There will still be we saw the budget yesterday, $18 million in Bernie dollars that'll be awarded. There's still other resources that will be moving to address these very issues that as we're going to talk about the priority properties that will be negotiated acquisition first, subsequently in REM or some other path. But this, again, low-hanging fruit category, I think it behooves us to be more opportunistic within the universe of strategically important properties. That's my thing. But again, I'm willing to be wrong. And I'd love to hear other thoughts.
I think my only concern is if we're not proactive at this point in the process to say, look, we've identified these initial neighborhoods that we want to start to catalyze to get them to the market fix that this envisions, that it could create questions regarding how strategic are we to the block by block strategy.
Right.
I think that there's that synergy is there because the CDO partners that the secretary has talked about and that the state talk about, they are the same as our partners on the ground that have been doing the block level planning, that have been at the table making the decisions, where the city is doing the work on behalf of those partners with the strategizing on these blocks, and where people know where that is. So I think that synergy exists and can only continue to just get stronger through this process with their activities. And, a lot of the work we do complements what they're already doing on this block, but they need us to move over here or vice versa. So it's not like those organizations are falling from the sky and have never been at the table.
No, also, how many strategic neighborhoods have we identified? Just
All of the vacant reduction priority geographies.
was what it costs pretty high number. That's what I'm saying. Like people won't have the confidence they need if we spread this across 12 neighborhoods, for example. That it is a block by block intentional focus. And what I get are questions from a lot of people asking, like, where do we start? If I had philanthropic dollars, or if my bank wanted to say, let me pick a neighborhood to help, there is a large audience waiting on us to say, like the Enough Act, like you see in other redevelopment efforts across the country, these are 3 to 5 that we really want to start to galvanize, and using the investment from the state and the city to start to catalyze that private.
And I would say that the ones that are at the forefront of that are the impact investment areas, because they've been in this work the longest period of time because we're not starting from scratch, right? And those are the ones where a lot of the work has been happening in those neighborhoods now for a long time. And we have the strong partners, they're actively deploying, we know what those blocks are. So if we were to take the vacancy, vacant reduction priority geographies and then concentrate that just as we did before, it would come back to those impact investment areas.
And I
So
don't
we
push
got
him,
the-
but I have to push.
Yeah,
Uh,
go ahead.
Yeah, but even with the impact areas, how many neighborhoods is that? That's what I'm saying, it's still
It's,
large.
the largest is Park Heights, which has the most number of neighborhoods in the impact investment areas. That's the largest. I mean, Coldstream Homestead Montebello is one neighborhood, Broadway East is one, but Park Heights is the one that has the largest number of distinct neighborhoods. But within that, we know what the priority blocks are. We know what the priority, geographies are, where those priority investments are happening that you can continue to build off of to catalyze.
So you
I
have
want
other
to push for us to
neighborhoods
be
that are
more
organized,
laser
right?
focused
Right.
on getting us
Sort of
to.
a sub level.
Let's
Yeah,
keep
it's-
let's keep
That's coming
dig-
up in the agenda.
Yes, it
Yeah,
is.
in the agenda.
So to keep digging on this, one of the things to consider is that we don't know what we'll receive. And so we have an opportunity based on what we receive back from all eligible CDOs to make decisions about what we can afford to fund, which is probably not going to be 100% of what's proposed. And so we have an opportunity to, one of the filters we could apply is geographic prioritization, which, we'll get into in a moment. Another one is, which properties are within the TIF, or were mapped within the TIF. There's a couple of filters like that we could apply, but I think this is a good point, and it's a tension that we've talked about in the last couple of weeks, and it exists for sure.
Community success is not just announcing state money, but being able to say, in addition, we've leveraged X millions of dollars in private dollars that get us toward the market fix set.
In this
So is
neighborhood,
that-
that neighborhood, this neighborhood, and we'll keep moving.
So is that an immediate next step, right? Is the next step around convening the CDFIs? Because are we actually convening them,
I think we
right,
should.
around
yeah.
this? Who should be doing that? Is that through the finance committee or some other entity? Because we do need to get the CDFI community available. If we want a national partner, OFN, the Opportunity Finance Network, they would, I think, be a great partner here. I'm happy to make a connection there to their CEO, but this is exactly what they do, is capacity building for CDFIs. I think on Opportunity Finance Network, they're the convener and, the group for CDFIs. And then on Mark's point, I think you're right. I've heard the same from the financial services community that they want to be in. It's just a matter of where and how they get in. And I think, through the CDFI world is a great opportunity, and many of them already fund a lot of the CDFIs. They fund OFN, right? So, but I mean, we need to show them where they need to get in. So again, I think that on Mark's point, there's an immediate next step as you are finalizing everything on your side, Secretary, of us convening the CDFIs as well as even the financial institutions about where, they can play in this. And actually on there, if they're doing it, because I imagine it'll be a mix of capital, Mark, on the, like, it might be philanthropic capital. And I feel like now, many of the, like, I think they're, as far as their like grant making and, schedule, that now is actually the time for us to be having that conversation with them before they kind of make all of their decisions about what they're going to be funding for the year. So I think he's right. Timing is of the essence.
Well,
Looking at the agenda.
yeah, so I know I'm going to be in much trouble based on how long I've allowed this conversation to go on, but I really want to say thank you to everybody. Appreciate it. I think the critical point here about the construction financing piece of this is, to your point, Faith. Now's the time. So, Tom Sadowski has his hand raised. Tom?
Yeah, I mean, thanks, Mr. Chairman. I don't mean to prolong it. I just, in talking to a lot of these potential financiers and partners, it'd be nice if we had some semblance of like a prospectus, if you will. Right? I mean, like, what is the opportunity? And, what is the ask? What are the other things that we're bringing to bear to help kind of make the whole business case or ROI argument? That's my only comment.
I think that's a great point, Tom. I think that's easily achievable based on not only what kind of initiating action or starting gun approach or effect that the BVRI accelerated round has, but also just more importantly and more broadly this convening that Mark's talking about. So I'm gonna continue to lead on this. You got that, and we'll talk more about that next month and in the coming weeks. So just real quick on the BVRI announcement, and I know just tomorrow 2:30. I know everybody's gotten the information about it, but tomorrow 2:30, I think we've sent out the address and all of that. Just make sure if you haven't seen that, let me know. Questions? No? Okay, good. And everyone is welcome, of course. Data requests. Okay, so as you can see here, there's a couple of items that we're tracking that are due this month. Some from state DHCD, some from city DHCD. You can see the list here. Please just take a look, see if anything is missing. As I've said, we're going to show this every month so we know what's in the works. We know what information we're working on, what we need. Apologies to Henry. This probably feels like a to-do list populating the screen for you. But the item at the top, I want to point out the request to identify properties owned by our strong community partners. That's something that will be drawn out in the application process, in the BVRI application process. We'll gain that information from them. And we also have a much kind of longer behind the scenes list of data requests that we can start to populate up here, but this is the condensed version that I think is probably most useful, but we can share all of it if other folks are not seeing something they've asked for up here. Any questions or anything anyone else sees?
What does yellow mean?
What's that?
What does yellow mean?
Not yet delivered. In process. In process. So we have a green list. We aren't showing that, but we can start showing that too if you want to see what's been delivered.
It's a lot to deliver this month.
It is every month.
For one.
But you are right. It is a lot. It is a lot. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know what to say about it other than that.
But I mean, are we on target? Maybe this is kind of both to actually provide this information. And is it critical to us moving things forward?
Yeah, Alice, I'm going to ask you to react to that because I mean, a lot of these tasks are to city DHC.
We're on track to deliver, and a lot of it is not critical to moving things forward. It's just explaining where things are moving forward. It's just explaining the work more.
Yes, some of these things are pretty necessary as we deploy the money that's been awarded to the city. Things that we need to know about, and MSA, things that we need to know. Next slide. Production data. Okay, Henry.
All right. Hey, good afternoon, everyone. I'll just jump in and steal the screen really quick and share. And I will say some of those data requests, I think kind of the three in the middle, I think the purpose of the presentation, after my piece is done, will kind of cover a lot of the ways that we are collecting and monitoring that information and categorizing to give everyone a better sense. Okay, so as a reminder, this is the BVRC dashboard. This is a public-facing tool, so you can access this information at any time. So I'm just going to do a quick run through of our goals and projections tab, which is at the top. Okay, so again, the first page is kind of just an overview of the VBN count, number of new VBNs issued, as well as rehab VBNs. I am going to kind of go through this fairly quickly, again, because it's a public-facing tool, so the information is out there. And then also, I know we have a longer presentation to get through after this. I also wanted to highlight the demolition tab. I think we're basically showing progress, kind of based on the number of days that have occurred in the year so far. We're around 75%, almost exactly 75% through the fiscal year. So you can kind of see if something is within a few points of that 75%, it's yellow and in progress. If we're not quite close to that, it's in red, and you'll see a little bit further down that there are some green ones that I will highlight in a moment. Completed demolitions, I do think that we stated at the outset that this is not something that we necessarily are tracking as a goal, but more as kind of a projection based off of the needs from our coming from our block level planning and the funding availability and things like that. I will say that there are over 150 properties in our BVRI funding request for demolition. We have another 100 or so that have been released to contractors, so I expect this number to jump up in the near future.
Can I ask a question about that? So it's been released to a contractor. What's the average length of time for a demolition to take place once it's been released to a contractor of a typical row?
The average time for a demolition, the demolition can happen itself within 1 to 3 days. And then the property doesn't officially get closed out. There's an additional kind of week to 3 weeks for fencing, grading, seeding, strawing, depending upon weather, et cetera. One of the only things that impacts that are emergency demolitions. So once we release, they're building their pipeline, and then the emergency demolitions come and move in as well.
How cumbersome or how long does it take to get the notice to proceed for a demolition?
It depends. There's multiple different, the work is dynamic, it is ever changing. So if it's a property that we do not own, then we have to complete due process, which is legal process. We might get challenged on that demolition and so forth. If it's one that we own, then we move that forward. And then, they're working through the pipeline. But typically from start to finish, soup to nuts, from notice to proceed, to completion is around, 60 days total, including fencing, grading, seeding. But, the pieces ahead of time also include environmental analysis, environmental remediation, utility cuts. All of that work is being done before we get to a point where we even are able to issue a notice to proceed. And that includes for city contractors as well for what we issue when we issue the notice to proceed to MSA. The process is the same, whether or not it's us or MSA.
Just a quick question. Do you have any that just fall before you get to them?
Yep, we do.
Is that a lot?
No.
Otherwise?
It's not a lot that just fall, but we do have a number of emergency demolitions that arise through inspections, on the ground inspections by our teams, as well as our aerial inspections and the AI roof program that we have as well that does the roof analysis like once a year.
Yeah, because we have one North Avenue in Greenmount.
Yep.
Yes, recently, and I.
That
Yes,
one, and that
I was
one,
driving through and I went, whoa.
and that one, we believe that there was actually someone in doing illegal acquisition of scrap metal that caused that to fall.
like that.
I'm
Just going down, it was a quick question.
I also misspoke. I think we have 100 that where due process is completed and 50 that are released to a contractor currently. Okay. Moving on to code enforcement. Again, we just have this one metric currently. showing the number of failure to abate, the $1,000 citations issued. We are, issuing those like crazy. We're really coordinating with code enforcement to make sure those are only being issued on properties that sort of the community isn't in the process of acquiring or renovating. And so making sure we're just kind of doing these strategically. And then I know people are interested in the acquisition and disposition numbers. So currently, as it relates to our goals, we are currently on track, I think, for the total number of completed acquisitions for the fiscal year. You can see in red acquisitions are above 75% and very nearly there for the other acquisitions. Again, those are grouped together, kind of the negotiation and condemnation because it does flip-flop across the acquisition types. And then again, you'll see kind of like the increase in expected NREMs, increasing dramatically as well, year over year. And then disposition is the last tab. Again, we are sort of on track for the most part, again, very nearly there with a 74.7% completed disposition of buildings and 90% of expected completed dispositions on vacant lots. One other thing I just wanted to highlight is that if you're interested in more detail on any of these tabs, there is a button at the bottom that will take you directly to the page that has kind of the more detailed view of these properties where you can kind of slice by neighborhood, vacancy reduction, priority geography, etc. So I'll pause there.
And just a reminder that everybody can view this in between meetings. You don't have to wait for the meeting to monitor progress.
It is linked on the BVRI website as well as through CodeMap.
Thanks, Henry.
Thank you, Henry. Okay, I'm going to move quickly in the interest of time to working group updates. Working groups have been meeting. They have each held a meeting, I believe, right? Each met. So why don't we do a quick round of updates? Beth, you want to start?
Sure. The data group met, and thank you, Secretary Flora, also for joining us. And they elected a very fearless leader to be their committee head.
Thank you.
Me. So I'm very excited to take on the work of the data working group. We also had a conversation about kind of what it is that we wanted to deliver back to the this larger process, and it's sort of manifold, but the first is a little bit of a process where we would work with the other working groups on a template, essentially, where data requests can be made, and then we will do a sort of review of those requests, so that way we can ensure that we're not overtaxing the state or the city on requests for information, and that they're targeted and that they're meaningful and that they're aligning to a process that we sort of have all shared and agreed to. And then we also are going to work on essentially an inventory of what's already available. There are lots of already publicly available data as it relates to this work. And so what we're going to try to do is have a well maintained ongoing inventory, and then we will also obviously have this process for getting additional requests made, and then once those requests are fulfilled, then the data that's provided in those requests will then move into the inventory, and we'll be able to sort of manage the process in that way. The idea is that we'll be supporting both the larger group and also the subcommittees, and so we'll continuously update when we have more updates on the structure of that. Did I miss anything?
No, I just want to say thank you, Beth, because you enthusiastically stepped up and agreed to chair. We really appreciate that. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Yeah, Beth,
Great
thank you.
expertise too.
And I think Marquette actually better answers your earlier point about data request pipeline than my answer. Thanks, Beth.
Sorry, I wasn't here for that.
That's right. Delivery chain, Matt.
I drew the short straw. We met, we selected the committee members, we discussed the scope of work, and we're in the process of scheduling our second meeting right now. So we're off the races then.
Thank you. Thank you.
Beth was showing off, but go ahead.
economic opportunity, Otis isn't here, but financing, Mark.
Yes, Leslie and I. Essentially, we met to set the game plan for the next few months, selected our chairs. A lot of the questions that I posed today are in support of the work that will be shaping under that committee.
And we also looked at the people that expressed an interest in serving on the committee and made those selections, and I understood that staff would be notifying them so that we could go ahead and schedule a next meeting.
And so in April, each of the working groups will meet again and with all of your members that are not council members. And so the work will begin in earnest. Thank you all. And thank you to the chairs for your leadership.
Only
Next
one
slide.
co-chairship, huh?
Yeah.
Well, Matt and I talked about
It's a-
it.
It's
We were
a,
gonna thumb wrestle, but I was like, Matt, you got it.
it's a big undertaking.
You got it.
Big undertaking.
Rock, paper, scissors.
We have total confidence. in that.
Right.
I'm very disappointed in that.
No, no, Beth
Level
and I
of
didn't even have to arm
enthusiasm.
wrestle, man. She was there. I was so happy, really.
All right, I'm gonna move us to the block level planning discussion and prioritization discussion. So I'm gonna ask, am I handing it over to Alice or Henry?
You were
Alice?
handing over to
Alright.
I.
Okay.
So good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for all the great discussion happening around the table so far. It's really exciting to be, really understanding better outcome of like how are we pushing the gas pedal to move all this work forward. Because I know a number of us, as the secretary said, we've been planning and executing and replanning and executing for a long time. And this is really about increasing that execution. I have a poster on my wall that says we have a strategic plan. It's called Doing Things. And I think we're all in the process right here of doing things and getting those things done. So we're going to learn a little bit more just about that block level planning and how that informs the work plans, how it informs the funding requests and different areas. Grounding reminder that this work is dynamic, it is interconnected, it is not static, it shifts, and it shifts for varying different reasons. We can go to the next slide. And this is another geographic reminder of where those priority geographies are, and that 70% of all of the VBNs are located within the vacancy reduction priority geographies. Grounding in, again, that we do not own all of the vacant properties in the city of Baltimore. We have about 915 right now. That number has gone up because, we keep acquiring some and we also dispose of others. So that is also a dynamic and changing number, as well as in, the private world and how that works. And this is also just another grounding reminder in that this work has been ongoing. We're currently executing the work. This is, it goes back to the work that we've done in the creation of the framework for community development, in the what we call the proof of concept neighborhoods of Oliver, Greenmount West, Johnson Square, the work of Rebuild Metro and Build in those neighborhoods that were grounded in the framework for community development, which is that roadmap and where we're going. A vacant building notice, just a reminder that there are only two ways to abate that vacant building notice. You can either demolish the property or get your use and occupancy permit. And then for the vacant lot work, we're wanting to make sure that it's either formally adopted, that someone has purchased it. Is it now a side yard to a wonderful homeowner? Is it awaiting assembly, site assembly as we're assembling others for future redevelopment, or is it also part of the city's green network strategy and green network plan and or stormwater management work that we have to do as well? And this isn't just about reducing the number of vacant buildings. This is about the holistic approach to create the whole block outcomes. And the city uses, as doing block level planning and looking at creating those whole block outcomes, the city utilizes every tool in the toolbox, a list of tools, which you'll see, a variety of different tools that we then utilize to create those whole block outcomes, and the holistic whole block outcomes of, making sure that all the vacant buildings are addressed, that our homeowners, our existing homeowners have been assisted, offered assistance, assisted, and any of the vacant lots are either in that managed stage or awaiting assembly and being, maintained while they're awaiting site assembly. And we know exactly who's maintaining it, what the regular cadence is for that maintenance and moving forward. This is on the next slide as a kind of grounding reminder. This slide is not one that is new, I think, to anyone around the table or in, a lot of our public participants as well that are here with us. We often use this as an example of Broadway East that shows as, going back to the creation of the framework for community development, looking at that asset mapping. What are the current market conditions? Where are we building markets? Where has the market started to kind of take off? And getting into the block level planning. So just as we took the city and created impact investment areas and kind of noted those back in the framework for community development, within the neighborhoods, we then created zones. So it ranges kind of from zones 1 to 5 in those neighborhoods. And then the priority blocks then take it even further within those zones in terms of where we're starting from, either building strength, because there are times when we have to build the strength, and then also where we are building from strength within those neighborhoods. Additional kind of added component, for fiscal year 25 in Broadway East, we had 28 priority blocks that represent 113 vacant building notices on those vacant buildings, as well as 155 lots. A key component for this is, areas that we're making investment in. There's several different small developers, as well as one of our kind of development partners doing work in the northeast quadrant of Broadway East as well. And then kind of also knowing where the current leading market conditions fall in that. So then, all of the work that we do at the city is centered in that goal of creating the whole block outcomes. Like I said, the work is dynamic, it's interconnected. It isn't necessarily that we are acquiring every property on a block to create the whole block outcome. We utilize every tool in the toolbox to create the whole block outcomes, which could be everything from acquisition to demolition, to receivership, to assisting homeowners, you name it. We're, using every one of those tools and the different types of acquisition or whatnot. And the block level planning leads to those whole block outcomes because we're assigning those strategies to the parcel level data that then creates those whole block outcomes. This work does have to be agile because things do shift sometimes, things do change sometimes. But ultimately, we want to ensure that everything is engaged in a productive use and we're creating that whole block outcome. So we partner, with other agencies and we utilize master plans. And we work through to ensure that the master plans, the strategic implementation plans that have been created, the community-led decisions, that those are being used as we assign the strategies and use all of the tools in the toolbox to address the VBNs and the vacant lots to create those whole block outcomes and ensure that we have that detailed path moving forward. On the next slide, you'll see kind of an overview. We've been trying to think about how best to visualize this. We've done different meetings. We've worked as well with our I team at the city, kind of how to explain this work. Like we said, it's dynamic, it's moving, and it is not static. It's a constant partnership and phasing of the work as well. And it is a diving in and looking at every single property. So, keys to success, making sure that we've have the supportive and engaged residents and community partners, that evaluation is occurring, the monitoring is occurring, and then we're basically repeating the process again on a new set of blocks, or we're also monitoring the existing blocks. So on the next slide, you'll see, part of it is kind of identifying some of those priority blocks. That goes back to what we talked about. We took the impact investment areas, we created zones 1 through 5, and then priority blocks within those zones. That is a similar process for the other vacant reduction priority geographies that aren't impact investment areas, but are some of our community asset building neighborhoods that we work with on a quarterly basis instead of a monthly basis, and really kind of drive that work. On the next stage is that we use those planning components and we convene the meetings with our collaborators, right? These are our community representatives, our CDO partners, our elected officials are at the table a lot of times for these discussions. Code enforcement, all of the agencies within DHCD, as well as at times our other fellow agencies, to then kind of evaluate and look at that information on a parcel level to then work through what those strategies are and then go into assigning the strategies on the next page, which makes sure that every VBN and vacant lot on that block has a strategy assigned to it. Is that an acquisition strategy? Is it a monitoring strategy? Is it acquisition through NREM? Does it show as NREM eligible at this point? Is it acquisition through other methods? Is it a receivership property? What is the active permit activity? When we're in the process of doing this planning, convening those meetings and assigning these strategies, it is lots of tables of lots of staff with lots of laptops out. And it's everything from looking at, does this property have an active tax sale foreclosure case on it? Because that would impact our ability to do the acquisition of a certain method. Does it have a active mortgage foreclosure case on it? We're investigating and analyzing all of the different property level components of this work. Because like we said, city only owns so many, private is held on a lot, and there's a lot of moving parts on those private market properties as well. Does it have recent permit activity? How soon did it change hands? All of that goes into, kind of figuring out which strategies make sense that still meet the community's wants and desires and what is in their community plans for the outcomes, on those blocks. Then it's about us deploying those strategies. That prioritizes within our operations. It informs our work plans. And it's not just DHCD doing this work. And I think that we've, a lot of the first part of the meeting today has really been focused on the fact that it isn't just DHCD doing this work. It is a village. It is our CDFIs. It's our CDO partners. It's our land trust partners. It is our greening partners on the vacant lot management component. Making sure that as we're deploying those strategies that we're, informing budget planning, that we're helping to support capacity building, that it's aligned with the neighborhood sub-cabinet and coordinating not with our own city agencies, but also state agencies and all of those NDO partners. So then we get to the point where we, monitor progress. The work is ever evolving. It's not static. We can't control all of the pieces and parts. There are times when, we've done and had a property identified on block level planning for acquisition. Well, then all of a sudden we see that someone has pulled permits. So we are no longer acquiring that property. They're pulling permits. And how can we help them, renovate the property or get to the outcome that's needed to abate that property? Sometimes we have a property that's slated for demolition and then something has changed or shifted in the market and with the community. And it's like, nope, we're not going to demolish that property. We're actually going to do the acquisition or we're going to support because the work is dynamic. It is moving, lots of moving parts and kind of making sure that things are moving around. And we'll get to a good example on that demo example on the next block as well.
We have big questions, so we just covered a lot. So what I want to get to, at least in this session, I think this was helpful, but a lot of this context, I think we all believe in and view this as core to community redevelopment. Do we have a actual game plan of here are the amount of blocks that we're
Yes,
targeting?
we're about to get to that.
And then here's where we are currently
Yep.
towards the execution of that.
Yep.
That then falls within the strategic areas and our impact investment.
Yep, we're about to get to that. Wanted to review with everybody the different planning and strategy definitions, because this is something that, we haven't reviewed with people, kind of what those definitions are and how they play out. We have acquisition, demolition, our infrastructure investments. On the next slide, you see, different LDA compliance, monitoring, our side yards, our receivership, our site assembly, stabilization. And then you start to get to the areas where we have, an understanding of the block level planning. So for fiscal year 25, we had 308 blocks within our block level planning. Just a quick note on those 308 blocks, there are 240 VBNs that do have active permits and 7 vacant lots that have active permits on them. In that, there are 2,868 properties that are either vacant buildings or vacant lots that have strategies assigned to them. So an example here as well is that, acquisition, we have that strategy assigned. It's a 665 VBNs as well as 425 lots. We have stabilization assigned on 177 properties, monitoring of code enforcement, which would be either recent sale or permits of 199, demolition, 82 properties on these for demolition. Disposition, it is 69 properties on these, strategy for disposition, and then vacant lots, 325 as well. This goes through also including kind of offering as a side yard on those vacant lots, and then also where we have different vacant lots that have been identified for infrastructure investment as well. So all of this work is happening within those 308, priority blocks for fiscal year 25. And the other piece also to kind of know and remember is that, 2,868 properties have been assigned at least one strategy. In block level planning, we often assign up to 3 strategies because it isn't just one strategy of acquisition. Then there's a strategy potentially of acquisition, then demolition, and then disposition, or sometimes it's flip-flopped and it's actually demolition, then acquisition, then hold for site assembly, or a stabilization happening so that then we can push it into in REM acquisition and then disposition.
Another question. So for 308 blocks, that's utilizing the current set of resources we have, right? What's the actual scale of the problem? Like how many blocks in this? I've heard different numbers.
Yep.
Have some type of blight or identified visually unacceptable conditions that would merit some type of public or private investment.
So we have some information on that. And I believe that's coming up in the closed session.
Okay.
Can you
Because and the reason why that's critical, you ever done any disaster recovery work? You generally want to know how big the problem is.
Yep. And
there's a difference in us measuring, say, a scale of vacants or VPNs versus how many blocks are we trying to transform?
transform?
And if we're operating with 308, so there's 2,000, we're not solving Baltimore's challenges, right?
Correct.
And so I want to make sure that we're putting the leadership in place, frankly, and the way that we're guiding this effort, that we actually start to drive the progress that the public and our stakeholders need to see.
Agree with that. And these 308, blocks include BVRI funding in them. This is, what is on the fiscal year 25 to be driving those changes. And we'll get to some of the additional information that you're asking in the closed session as well. One more kind of grounding section. We wanted to give an example here of Loyal and Northway in terms of kind of block level planning and action. This is a property, area, Park Heights. This has been one that has been underway for a number of years. You can see kind of the assigned strategies that we had, through acquisition as well as receivership. There is no stabilization on this block. What you see are that there are still 4 city-owned properties that have been tagged for disposition. That's actually one that was a dynamic change. Originally, those were actually slated by the community for demolition. And then in conversations and looking at the changing in market, we shifted about a year ago on, moving those to disposition. You can see a number of the completed receivership properties. That was the tool in the toolbox that was used on that block that now have homeownership outcome. So everything in purple is homeownership outcome. We still have one in rem acquisition underway of a vacant property on that block. We're acquiring a vacant lot that will be future green space at the corner. And then we had one property, the fifth property that is vacant next to the city owned. That is an example where that was originally tagged for possible acquisition, possibly through in rem, but actually there's a developer that we know the developer, we know of him. He is purchasing it from the estate directly. And so PHR and the city will be supporting in that development process. So PHR, our CDO in the neighborhood, is taking the lead on the redevelopment of the 4 city-owned properties. And then the private developer will be doing that fifth, and then we'll be working on disposition once we complete the in-rem acquisition there.
Since you're highlighting that block, how many years have you been working on that block?
We have been working on Loyola Northway easily over the years, at least 10 years in terms of planning. This goes back to part of the planning on the master redevelopment and then putting into place some of the components related to, and this also goes to some capacity. We've had really great capacity at PHR in the last 5 years, and that has greatly impacted the progress that we've seen on this block. If you were to have looked at this block 5 years ago, every place that has the square with the receivership, that would have been a vacant property 5 years ago. So within 5 years, we've actually been able to utilize city money, state money, as well as leveraging $1 million in private investment to rehab on that block. You can go to the next slide.
Can I add, let's have a lot of thoughts today. So, but I think it's really important that we start accelerating and elevating how we're addressing the scale. Like, to me, that's what I'm trying to get at today. That a lot of this is valuable when you're looking at us trying to get to a $3 billion case. The neighborhood by neighborhood is not going to help make the case based on what I think is much broader impact that you all are making and much broader impact that we're trying to make. And so even in how we source some of the data, it is going from 308 to X thousand. So I'm sure it's in the thousands, right? And being able to really then understand, okay, how are we galvanizing the resources that then execute at that scale?
And I think that is I think that's in line with, I think, the theme of the meeting today, from even the work and the announcement that the secretary has made, and how are we, moving forward at scale as fast as we can to move this work because of the sense of urgency and what's needed to tackle on the blocks.
Can I just ask the prior map?
Yes,
Is this one of the 308 blocks?
this is one.
Okay.
Yeah.
And there is this level of detail, not necessarily this level of completion, but there is this level of planning for each of the 308 blocks.
Yes. Yeah. On the 308 blocks, there are 2,868 total properties, including BBNs and vacant lots, and all 2,868 properties on those priority blocks have strategies assigned to them, anywhere from 1 to 3 strategies at varying levels.
Are there work plans in place for how many additional blocks would be added for the next fiscal year?
Yes, so that block level planning and that review is happening now, which is informing the BVRI request for next year and where that comes out. So there is that analysis is working and continues to work from strength, and then continues to look at where those continued investments come in.
Thank you.
Change?
What's that?
Does that change?
Does it change?
Yeah, with the new plan.
Yeah, I mean, it changes what's available.
Right.
As we have more resources devoted to the quick action, there are less devoted to preparing properties to be acquired for the existing pipelines. until those existing pipelines expand, which I view as, hopefully something that's going to happen rapidly, then, resources shift back. There's a tension there for sure.
And like looking to fiscal year 26, there's some areas. So for fiscal year 25, for BVRI funds, there's 380 acquisitions that are being funded for fiscal year 25. 171 stabilizations, 156 demolitions, 2 large-scale demolitions. For fiscal year 26, we were actually looking at a higher number of demolitions in some of the neighborhoods that we've been working on in terms of planning, where we know that some of those demolitions have to occur. So that potentially would impact in terms of how, and those conversations, because the acquisitions, the negotiated acquisitions, they're ones that we can do, but they're ones that the private market can move on as well, that we might have to stand. So we have to continue to work through those numbers and what's available.
Well, you still have a couple of slides to go through.
We have, just about 3 or about 5 more.
Okay, I'll ask the question after you finish.
Okay. So there are, like I just mentioned, 308 blocks in the fiscal year block level planning. They contain, the 1,568 open VBNs, 1,300 vacant lots. All of those strategies have been assigned. On the next slide, we start to drive in a little bit, Mark. This is some of the questions that you were asked as well. What we're looking at is that there are 3,152 total blocks in the vacancy reduction priority areas. Now, what the team is working on and what we'll have actually in this next level of analysis, and we just could not get it done by today, is that not every one of those blocks has a vacant property on that block. There are actually in the VRPGs, I always mess up that acronym, not every block will require an intervention because not every block has a vacant property or a vacant lot. So we're diving more in so that we're actually looking at the reality of, out of the 3,152 blocks, how many have 1 VBN, how many have 3, how many, are at that 10 mark or, greater. And that will start to give us a better sense on like the block scaling, I think, that you were looking at getting.
Has the city ever taken an approach to, and maybe it's just me that this would be helpful for, I don't know if it would be helpful for anybody else, but taking an approach of coding those blocks by condition? I mean, because if you're saying there's 3,152 total blocks in the vacancy reduction priority geographies, of that, there is some portion that doesn't need any investment to address vacancy.
Yep.
Can we call that, category A, coded
Yeah.
green, whatever. And then there is a second category, a third category, a fourth category, a fifth most distressed, however you want to divide it up. But I feel like some coding or mapping that gave us a visual representation and a block by block kind of categorization of its condition or the degree to which it has a problem.
Yeah.
Mark, I don't know if that's speaking to your question.
That
That would be helpful
Yeah.
to me.
And that is, the team is actively working on that. So what we were doing is trying to build off of, a mapping tool that we did as a kind of pilot mapping tool in partnership with the state that we did of Johnson Square. That actually was an over time as well, that showed the change in blocks over time from kind of that red bad to more green positive. And this is also the tool that is the visualization tool that will help show on a block level space where we are seeing whole block outcomes and what is getting to kind of that green mark. That is something that has come up and we have talked about it. The data team is working on that visualization. That was taking a little bit more in-depth team, and the data team has reported to me that would be something in kind of the May, June timeframe.
Okay. And not just I'll tell you, the value that might have in May is that it could inform that where we set that filter in terms of prioritization based on what we get back in the application process for CDOs for BVRI. There's multiple things coming together here Mark,
Yeah.
to your point, that I think if we knew that, if we could say, like, of divided into fifths, the two most distressed categories is where we're gonna focus our attention, or the two, closest to whole block, status is where we're gonna focus our attention. While, I made an argument for being opportunistic as can be, I think we can thread the needle of being opportunistic within the priority blocks, based on the resources that we've got at our
Yeah,
disposal.
and I think there's a conversation we need to have on, obviously, public investment can't do it all. And I'll use the analogy of, say, the state having the person who delivers our life sciences incentives is different than having the ecosystem leader for life sciences for the state. Because they're making sure all the pieces come together to execute the state strategy.
Yeah.
Are we at a place where this needs that kind of leadership? Where there's private blocks that maybe investment can catalyze that don't require a subsidy, or other entities from the state's investment or other tools that augment public investment. But it feels like a lot of it is still in silos. And I guess what my head is how do we make sure that the neighborhoods get down to zero? And are we only gonna wait on kind of public subsidy to get there?
I would say that's a great question. And there's a lot that is happening with our development partnerships where they are actually leveraging those private investments and those private dollars in certain blocks or on certain projects. So it is it's a yes and,
But even
But is it
And-
intentional?
it is intentional.
but adding to that, right, there's a kind of going back to my life science analogy. The cluster leader can make the case for why people should be investing in the market.
Mhm.
Who's making that case for Baltimore?
Mhm.
Is that like knitting together blocks
Yeah,
so
that
that
is-
way and then you have an outer rim of, so it's,
If you incentivize this block, but I have another block that doesn't need incentive.
Mhm.
Incentive, who's making those cases? And who's telling the broader story?
Mhm.
It then helps people understand that we're a market that's transformed.
not a model that's worked that successfully in Baltimore, just.
Well, it's multi-pronged and it's kind of giving different paths.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
and
It's,
Can you expand on that point? That not a model
mean,
that's worked.
I think that we've seen pockets of development happening in neighborhoods and the idea was that it would then instigate development around those neighborhoods and that just hasn't always. I mean, I can think of more failures than I can think of examples of success there. So I think that one of the things we have to think about is how we could infuse some innovation into the thinking on actually doing that. And that would require a whole set of, I think we could look at other cities outside Baltimore, but I don't think there are specific examples in Baltimore.
Right in the middle of the 650 open VBNs included in the FY25 PBR funding request. Aren't there other VBNs that are impacted by the FY25 awards?
There are, and so that includes, there's work happening in those blocks that also cover our city capital dollars, our other just acquisition dollars through NREM that don't require, capital dollars associated with it. So we wanted to definitely pull out here the ones that were the BVRI funded.
And this doesn't reflect any application of funding from the citywide TIF.
No, this does not reflect the TIF at this time.
That goes to this larger point that these are things that are all happening in a diffuse way.
Right,
Whole
but I think,
systems approach,
I just
right?
think this is really, really helpful, and I know everybody's been asking for the number of blocks for a while, so I think it's really important to kind of get that out there. I think it would be really helpful, given that the FY25 BBRI awards are already out there, to say, like, this is what we're getting for those awards. This many VBNs, this many acquisitions, this many dispositions, demolitions, whatever. Because as you're accelerating the 26 awards, we're gonna want to put those two things next to each other to say, like, hey, this is what we're getting because we're doing things differently.
Yeah.
So I think, like, in terms of the data requests that are out there, like applying kind of the prospective lens for 26 to the 25
To the
awards.
25.
So we know, like, this is what we're getting out of 25, so that when we start to talk about the 26, we can make better choices. I think that would be helpful. And I would think that to get a 25 award had to answer all these questions anyway. So we probably have to just kind of consolidate that information.
Yeah. To the extent that there are awards that were made to CDOs that will abate a VBN, yes, but a lot of that money moved through the city too.
So, yeah,
I mean,
But
I'm
the city's
assuming we
got
have
it.
the city, we
Yeah,
have the city's
city's got the
piece.
data.
We have the city's piece,
Yep.
but we don't have the CDO piece, do we? Like,
No, but we can pull that together.
we should just ask them, you know?
yeah, just a ground, I think, we had about 20 million that covered acquisition and a couple of the, I think the infrastructure, and then 9 million for demolition and stabilization of BVR funds for fiscal year 25. So that starts to break down with those 380 for acquisition, some acquisition relocation, et cetera.
And so, but to Mark's earlier point, and the point that I think I'm hearing about kind of the disparate strategies, maybe it would be helpful to actually see the capital stack together, right? Because you got 25 funding BVRI, 26 BVRI coming, TIF dollars are coming, capital dollars that are already there. So what does that look like, and what do we believe we're getting for all of the resources that we're putting in? And then the other piece of this, Commissioner, I don't know that we can get this, but could you overlay that with the block level planning?
Yeah. And we, yes, that's a very simple yes. And the team, this is one of those from the financial piece that we've been trying to also kind of refine on some of the data to show not just the city's investment, but also the state's previous investments that were all, preceding BVRI to help at that parcel level. And it's been just working to get it to that parcel letter, but staff is
and the
all
TIF
shaking their head,
The
yes.
TIF money is on the street when?
September.
So September. And then, but then going back to this capacity question, right? Got a lot of money on the street in a way that it's never been.
Between May and September.
Yes,
Which is good.
it's great. It's what we wanted.
But there's gotta be some layered in
Yeah.
strategies, so that we're not just being diffused.
Some
But the
definite
50 million from the
requirements.
state, how many years has there been 50 million from the state?
One.
Just one. I mean, what about before that in terms of core and other things? I mean,
Max was 20.
okay, so it's more, yeah, but I mean, like,
So, but it's more, but it's not an absurd increase. I mean, it is we can scale from 20 to 50, it's, and again, there,
But you should be able to also demonstrate impact.
For us,
That is not just a one-to-one on the increase.
absolutely.
but I mean, I think that we have to model like what the pacing is going to be. And I mean, Michael, what are the tranches of the non-contiguous TIF? Like how much is going to be out next year?
The first tranche that we're putting out is going to be about 25 million, and the subsequent tranches are going to be about that size. We'll do a tranche every year or two. But yeah, the very first one is going to be 25 million. I should be hitting the ground in September.
in
Now, that's-
September, you saying?
September.
But then can't we do, we can do other things with that money? Meaning, can't we do infrastructure improvements?
So
Or,
the first, you can, and the first tranche will include 2 infill projects on vacant lots that have the infrastructure money. That's gonna be a significant dollar figure associated with it that help finish out like a significant whole block area of a significant number of lots. So it's,
And now we're gonna have the block by block information on the TIF. We'll also have it on we have it on the BVRI money in the city. I think it'd be very helpful to get that on the, like that goes through the CDCs. It would also be really helpful to get that information on the third party, which I don't think we've had at that level of detail in the past.
No, yeah, but we can. That's, I think that's gonna be easy enough to provide.
we can move through. We had some other information in general kind of data just on also where we are currently with some of the city-owned properties in these blocks. There's 182 city-owned VBNs in those 308 blocks. We have some are being actually held as part of we can't move on them yet because they're smack in the middle of other vacant properties that have not gone through an acquisition function or an acquisition stage. Often these have anywhere, like we said, from 1 to 2 to 3 strategies assigned to them. On the next slide, you'll see 746 city-owned vacant lots with assigned strategies. That covers also multiple agencies. So I just want to remind everybody, when you are looking at code map and you see a green vacant lot, that does not mean that that is in control of DHCD. We have everything from highways to sewers, to comptroller, real estate, tax sale, and so forth. And we are engaging with a consultant that's going to be helping us just clean up the data on the vacant lot, so we have a better sense of who has what. The other pieces is that right now, just on vacant lots in general, making sure that our community partners are correctly identified, because there might be a vacant lot that we see that shows up on code map that has actually been a very well-maintained community garden for however many years, and we're not about to go and, disrupt that community garden that's part of the master plan on those vacant lots. So this gives also some of the last slide here gives some of the strategy summary stats that we see. Not everything, like we just mentioned, is state funded. Currently, of these, we have state funded properties. 58% of the strategies that are listed below are in progress or complete. We have a number of the BVRI funding, like we mentioned earlier, 328 properties in acquisition that are the ones that are negotiated or purchased, and then moving all the way down to stabilization, disposition, receivership, and demolition. So it also shows the percent that's in progress or complete. And for that finishes out this portion.
Can you go back?
To that one?
Yep. I think what I the way I think about these things, and maybe it's just too many years of government budgeting, and money shows up, you got it for a year. The truth is, you got it for a lot longer. But we need to start thinking about it like we've got it for a year, and it's it should start burning a hole in our pocket. And so I look at the far right column, percent in progress or complete. And I think, our objective ought to be to try to accelerate and thus increase the percentage that can be completed within each year of whatever the strategy is for the priority properties and on the priority blocks. So whatever that strategy is, you're trying to spend that money within the fiscal year in which it's awarded. It's not as if we don't know the priority blocks. It's not as if we don't know the priority properties. We need to accelerate the speed at which we deploy the resources to affect each of those strategies. So, that's the intent of what we talked about at the beginning of this meeting. I know that's what y'all are trying to do and what we're,
And what we've talked
it's the
about.
whole exercise
Yeah.
here. But that, some of those percentages are, not exactly where we'd want them to
Where
be,
we
right?
would want to be.
Demolition, stabilization in particular. So accelerating the deployment of those dollars, or dollars for which those activities are eligible, like state money, is, I think, priority one from where I sit.
So the question I had was, if you could flip back to the earlier slide where it named the number of properties that the city owned.
Mhm.
And I know you'll send these slides out to us, I'm sure, but go all the way back.
Keep going.
It was at the beginning. 9 something.
Oh, okay. Sure, I can
You got where I am?
go back.
Yeah.
Okay. So the 950 properties owned by the city, nearly 12,000 owned by private investors, and 117 other. What's the other?
The other starts to pick up federal agencies, state agencies, the Housing Authority of Baltimore City.
So the problem is the 11,839. A huge problem.
That's the huge problem.
And that's, we went so fast to that slide. I was like, what was that number?
So that's what I was saying earlier, that as much as I would like to believe the public subsidy would get us to zero there, or even 1,000, it's going to take the coalescing of a lot of different strategies
To turn neighborhoods.
and
And
cost of
focus on
money and new market tax credits and all these different tools that truly transforms a neighborhood.
But targeting certain neighborhoods, getting the work done block by block, changing the market so that you can move to another distressed neighborhood. Would do it so you see progress.
And we know that, you know, things are also moving. So out of those 11,839, about 3,700 changed hands. So it means that they sold, that VBN sold within the last 2 years. And of that 3,700, about 2,500 don't have permits. So there's about 1,700 that have changed hands in the last 2 years that have active permits on them of that 11,000 number.
It's still a high number.
It's still
It's still a high number. I'm not saying,
No, I got
that,
you. It's
like,
still
is, like,
just a
the
very high
miraculous,
number. The
you
big
know,
problem.
there is, you know, that's the one thing about this work, which I think all of us at the table would love if there was, you know, a magic wand that just was waved and immediately solved the problem. And that doesn't exist. And we have a lot of things I think that have come up in this meeting especially that are tied towards just driving the work, driving the investment, and really, you know, coordinating that to get us to that lower number, which I think we're all wanting to do and need to do.
So we can target those numbers. Say it again.
We have all these tools that we're adding, right? The state's pot is just one. TIF, funding, like these things are layering on.
But do we fundamentally understand why things aren't getting to the finish line?
We have a really, I think, I would say that there are a lot of components that I can think of on a neighborhood by neighborhood basis that are even some of our stronger neighborhood partners. The biggest thing that has held some of our stronger neighborhood partners from getting to the finish line is having access to more dollars and capitals on our CDO. It goes back to not just the appraisal gap or the infrastructure gap or even the vertical housing construction gap, but also the capital and the financing component of that flexibility. And that really is one of the driving factors. And then I'd say number two is just the time frame that it takes at this stage and what is taken over the last however many years on any acquisition that needs to occur on those private VBNs, you know, to drive those outcomes as well. So you have the acquisition, and then you have just sheer, you know, some of our partners, they've told us if they had $2.5 million tomorrow, we know one that it's like, if we had $2.5 million tomorrow, we could work to finish out a block of city-owned vacants that we're under LDA with them with. But they're not able to move on those until they have more funding available or a different line of credit or a different financing mechanism to move on them.
There's a lot of state money and city money that's about to hit the ground, but that's never happened before. That's the new thing, and we have to get it right and do it right now. But the scale of the money that's about to come in over the next few months is 2 orders of magnitude higher than what we've done in the last 30 years.
So this is a job that's larger than the city, is what I'm trying
Yeah,
to say.
it really is. That's why I use the reference of how you generally create industry incentives. Is you can't assume that just the incentives or the public subsidy are enough, right? The governor of Safer wants to build the quantum capital of the world. There's a state's role and then there's all of our roles.
It's the state roles. The city has specific things that they need to do to streamline. So it's
Yeah,
multiple
but then just even
players
ushering
that we
that
would need to
forward.
coordinate
Yeah.
and work together.
To Beth's question, you know, going back to what is our objective? Yes, it's to abate VBNs and to fill buildings with families, with people. And so finishing the process is critical. And that's where, you know, this notion of whether it's line of credit or construction financing, you know, through whatever vehicle, And a fund that does that work or funds that do that work is so important because even as we acquire and demolish and accelerate that work through, a different way of deploying state resources, the job's not done. Job's not done until we execute the rehab or build a new building on that site. For all those that are buildable and accelerate that work. That's going to take coordination of private dollars.
So just a quick question, should there be a motion on the floor to extend this 105?
If you hadn't noticed, I let us run through
Right.
and didn't want to restrict conversation. What I want to do is we'll re-advertise the closed session, push the closed session to the right till next meeting. And I think the open discussion was more important today,
Oh,
in my opinion. So I don't think we need a motion to extend. I think
Okay.
what we need is to wrap up here today and we'll do the closed session next meeting.
How much time do you think we need for the closed session?
Alice, I'm going to defer to you on that.
It has about another 40 slides in the closed session, but some of those actually move quickly. We could probably do that in, 45 to 40 minutes with time for discussion, or an hour, like with the amount of discussion. I want to make sure that there's time for that and it's not just blowing through the slides.
So our agenda, we just need to think about
It'll
the
be
time.
45 minutes to an hour. I mean, I do want to note, we have to be careful about our discussion in closed session. So we'll have to come back out for most of our discussion if it affects policy. But you looked like you had
No,
something
no,
else to
no.
say. No, okay, all right. Anything else for the good of the order? Thank you, everyone, for your, I'm sorry.
Just
Secretary
one
Flora.
quick one. I don't know if I just feel the same way, but slides would be really helpful in advance. Because we don't see them until after the
We can do
meeting.
that. Yep.
Yeah.
Right, so these slides are coming out.
We're
to us,
trying to
right?
We can do
absorb
that.
all the pieces,
We'll
even the day before would
Yep.
be really helpful.
We'll commit to that.
Yeah, it's just hard to react to so much coming at
Of
us.
course.
It is a lot. So you can send those slides out to us today.
Those won't be able
so
to
that we
be-
can absorb
Yes.
it.
Those
Right.
closed ones.
We'll get those. Council members, there's lunch for you over here. Thank you for your time. Anything else? Thank you all so much for the
Yeah, motion to adjourn.
lively, fruitful discussion today. Is there a second? All in favor?
Second.
Yes.
Aye.
Just saying.